Welcome to Al Bernstein Unplugged Unboxing. In a 40-year Hall of Fame career, Al has chronicled some of the greatest moments in boxing history. On this podcast, you get to hear him expand on those memories and talk about the current news in the sport of boxing. You also hear Al interview some of the biggest names in the sport. Here's Al Bernstein Unplugged.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the show. Excited about this one because we have two fine guests for you. We're going to be talking with Ben Askren, who is, of course, a former MMA star who is boxing against Jake Paul on April 17th on the Triller Fight Club card. And Ben is an interesting guy. I think you'll find the conversation very intriguing. And also, we're going to talk to Brian Dugan, who is a fine author who has written a book called Super Fight, which chronicles the Marvin Hagler-Sugar Ray Leonard match from April 6th, 1987. So we're right at a anniversary for that fight. Let me introduce you to my co-host, as always, the estimable Trip Mitchell. Hi, Trip.
Well, I'm hoping estimable, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but I'm hoping that's good, isn't it?
Yes, it's excellent. It's
okay, great. Hey,
it means you're a great humanitarian and a credit to your race, which I believe is the fourth at Hialeah. Oh, that's so old. That joke has moths on it. Yeah.
I know, but you know, getting back to the 80s, speaking of old things, you were lucky enough to call a lot of the Hagler fights. You didn't call the Hagler-Leonard. Was that strange? Do you feel weird going to an event that you're not calling?
Well, it's interesting. That one was the one that I did my musical act, and we talked about that last week, leading up to that one at Caesar's Palace. So I was busy that weekend. But I didn't actually call that fight. And I remember it was strange because not only I wasn't even sitting in the press section for some reason. I was in the third row in a seat. I don't know why. I can't even remember how that happened. But I was sitting there watching the fight just as a spectator. And I'm not even sure that I participated in the SportsCenter coverage of that, strangely, because then it was just before I started participating in those, even though I was doing all the boxing for ESPN. So I was there as a spectator, and it was a fascinating evening. I kind of got to feel the pomp and circumstance of the evening.
Yeah, and some other show we'll talk a little bit more about SportsCenter, what it's like to do those hits, because I think a lot of our viewers are very interested in that.
Yeah, that was a unique time for sure, and it is interesting they don't maybe have a knowledge of that.
Sure. So let's start out. We've got a question right away. In their prime, Foreman or Tyson, if they'd fought each other, Rob Ovett, with that question.
Yeah, that's intriguing. And you know, which prime, right? Which Foreman prime, which Tyson prime? They had a couple of different parts of their career. And George Foreman said to me on several occasions when he was mounting his second comeback, I think I can beat Mike Tyson. He was in his early 40s, but he felt that he had the right stuff. And he thought Tyson would be the champion when he finally got a world championship match. Well, Evander Holyfield had upset Mike Tyson, and so he would fight Holyfield for the title and lost in a thrilling matchup, which Holyfield won, but George Foreman acquitted himself extremely well. And it's always been my feeling that George Foreman had a certain style and a certain way of handling himself in the ring that would have been tough for Tyson. During Tyson's great years, I always said just a really good boxer puncher is never going to beat Mike Tyson. He's too much of an offensive machine. You have to either be the consummate boxer or you have to be very powerful. Well, George Foreman was very powerful, and he knew how to fight smaller fighters, and Tyson would have been shorter than him. And of course, we all remember what Foreman did to Joe Frazier, and the way he was able to deal with him coming in. And I just believe that at the end of the day, George Foreman might have been too much for Mike Tyson. I think stylistically, he had that power, that uppercut, that made you not want to get on the inside against George Foreman if you were a shorter fighter. And we saw him lift Joe Frazier 3 inches off the mat with that punch. I think that would have been a huge weapon against Mike Tyson. And ultimately, I think I think Foreman probably would have won the fight. Some may disagree, and if you do, you can tweet me at Al Bernstein, and we'll have a conversation about it. Well, I don't know if Ben Askren and Jake Paul can reproduce what Tyson and Foreman might have done in their prime, but they will go at it on April 17th. Jake Paul, of course, the YouTuber who is now a full-time boxer, taking on Ben Askren, who is a former champion in the mixed martial arts world for Bellator and the ONE Championships. And it's been quite a build-up leading up to the April 17th fight that they're going to have at the Mercedes-Benz Center. I'll be there as part of the announcing team. It should be an intriguing night of boxing on Triller Fight Club. And we had a chance to chat with Ben Askren, and here it is. So, Ben, after you retired in 2019, was there any thought in your brain that you might be back in action in any way in a combat sport?
Well, boxing, no, definitely not.
Yeah.
I mean, when I retired, I said something like, this is never going to be my career again, but if something interesting comes up, I would love to do it. For me, I've been competing for 20 years, and I know myself enough to know that I'm probably going to need to do something to like stay in shape, kind of as a hobby type thing. So I actually thought it was going to be, I'd probably do a couple wrestling matches or something, right?
Oh,
kind of go back to my roots. There's now more and more professional avenues for wrestling. So I figured, hey, I'd do a couple wrestling matches, stay in shape, kind of be fun for me. And then this came up. And so it's like, hey, that sounds like fun. I've never boxed before. Let's give that a shot, and good reason to get in shape and do all that stuff.
Yeah, and of course, here you are fighting a YouTuber of all things in Jake Paul, and you.
Life's funny.
Yeah, life is funny. Life takes us in many different directions, doesn't it? And you, to prepare for this, how did your training camp differ preparing for boxing than when you prepared for mixed martial arts?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of fun for me because obviously I was a wrestler for the majority of my life until age 24. And, wrestling's a relatively narrow skill set compared to mixed martial arts. Well, kind of everything is, right? Because in mixed martial arts, you can do everything, right? Boxing, kickboxing,
Yeah, exactly.
Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling. And so to come back to something that's a more relatively narrow skill set, it's kind of fun, right? Because you get to focus on just this one little thing essentially for 12 weeks and just try to get good at it. So I've had a lot of fun with it. I never really tried to be a boxer in mixed martial arts. My striking was essentially just defend a few punches and get close enough to take them down, and that was relatively effective for me. And I've always been, I don't want to say a hardcore boxing fan, but I've been a boxing fan. And so, getting in there and getting that, getting to do it one time, I don't want to say it's an honor, but it's kind of cool. It's kind of fun.
You mentioned, I saw you in another interview mentioning something I thought was fascinating, that there are certain things, of course, that you're not going to do in mixed martial arts, like with your lead leg or rolling under punches. So there are certain things that you would never do in mixed martial arts that you kind of get to do in this discipline. Will you be able to do those instinctively after one training camp?
Yeah, I feel like pretty much most of it should become instinctive. I mean, it's been 12 weeks. I'm not going to do anything else also, right? It's not like I'm training for MMA on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and doing boxing on Tuesday.
Yeah, right. That would be counterproductive, huh?
Yeah, it would be. I mean, I tried doing that with wrestling and mixed martial arts in 2010, and it sucked. You always felt like you were leaving something out. No, so I think those things will become instinctive by fight time. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of things. I mean, really that first couple of weeks was just exploring like why am I moving this way? And pretty much all of the reasons I was moving that way were because, well, this is a productive movement for me in mixed martial arts, but it's not something that's gonna be productive in boxing. So I need to eliminate it.
Now, you have had a couple boxing people help you. A former champion, Cornelius Brundage, the K9. He's from Detroit. But then you spent a week in L.A., I believe, with Freddie Roach, Hall of Fame boxing trainer, somebody I'm very well acquainted with. And how much did the boxing people help you pick up things that you think are beneficial to you?
I mean, it's huge, right? Because like I said, I was never a boxer. And, I worked with my old coaches, Duke and Scott at Rufus Sport. And Duke has done a few pro boxing matches, but obviously the majority of his fights were in Muay Thai or kickboxing. So it was interesting getting boxing people's perspective. And I think both of them were relatively good at saying like, hey, listen, you're doing one. I'm not making a career out of this, right? I'm doing one fight. Who knows? Maybe there's one more, right? But it's not like I'm not gonna do 10. That's not gonna happen. And so it's like, well, we take what you already do well, or what's already as effective as possible, realizing there's no way you can encompass all of the things that happen in boxing in 12 weeks, right? That's impossible.
Yeah, that's interesting. So they try to now. Here's a question, and this leads us into you discussing Jake Paul, your opponent. Did they do anything that was specific from what they saw him doing, just his brief couple bouts as a boxer, or it was geared to that, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, I said, because I'm not going to become a career boxer, right? So it's not like I need to figure out how to do everything. And I'm right at this point. I'm only going to have one fight, and it's going to be against Jake Paul. So we need to look at the things that he does well. And I think it is kind of hard to glean too much from the two fights he's had. I always say this with wrestling, like if I have one of my kids that I'm coaching and they go against another guy who's not very good, like I as a coach can't gather that much out of that, because the skills are so vast, right? One guy's here, one guy's here. All the moves are going to work. Yeah. Right? Any move they try is going to work. They're going to look like an all-star. So I need you to be against someone who's equitable competition, or maybe better than you, to figure out more about your skill set.
Yeah, it's a good point. Now he's very, obviously an outspoken, flamboyant type, and but he made an interesting comment that he said, none of what I say is going to get in Ben Askren's head, because he comes back at me and all the rest. He said, but nonetheless, I think I'm going to win because his boxing skills are at the level of a fourth grader. What's your response to that?
Yeah, so I would say probably on fight night, my boxing skills will be better than a fourth grader. And listen, I would probably guess, especially if you just like looked at us hitting mitts or whatever on fight night, you'd say, oh, that guy's better than that guy, right?
Yeah.
But one thing I know from wrestling and from combat sports is it ain't just about how good you look doing it. And there's been many times when you can look at two people and say, wow, how's that guy going to compete with that guy? And when you get in the cage or get in the ring or get on the mat with another man, if one guy can make it a tough enough fight and the other guy is not used to dealing with adversity, that can change everything. Mike Tyson famously said it about a punch. What he said, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And I would elaborate on that and say everyone has a plan until they get tired. Everyone looks good until they get tired. And some people just so happen to get tired really, really quickly, right? And so, I know with wrestlers, in wrestling, only a 7-minute match. You can have one guy at the beginning of the 7 minutes, and you can see a totally different guy at the end of the 7 minutes. And that it's only 7 minutes, right? So I think there's a lot to do with the competitive aspect of this. I've been competing my whole life in combat sports, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, and mixed martial arts, and I understand how to compete.
He said that he actually talked to George Masvidal, and one of only two men to defeat you. And one of the pieces of advice he got from him was that you are going to try to hold him and weigh on him and make him tired, which it sounds like you probably will do in those early rounds.
I mean, isn't that obvious though?
I guess that really isn't the greatest insight on the planet, is it?
It's not the greatest insight. Yeah, I mean, it's like I'm not going to stand at range and try to eat his best punches. I'm not going to be flashy. That's not who I am or how my body's built.
Yeah. It's not like if you got on the inside, people would say, "Who knew?" Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every athlete has to try to play to their own strengths. Yeah. Right. And that's kind of what I've done my whole life, whether it was wrestling or mixed martial arts. And that's what I'm going to try to do in boxing.
You had a hip replacement. And it seems like, from what I've heard you say, that rather than that being something that is detrimental in preparing this fight, it's helped you, that you've felt so much better from it. Is that the case?
So much better. I couldn't recommend it enough. If I would have known the result of what it was going to be, I would have done it significantly earlier. I was dealing with various levels of that. Probably the earliest I can remember is 2009, 10. I was having, some minor issues with it. And then, I built up as my career went along. And so definitely the first time I retired from mixed martial arts was November of 2017. and I was having significant issues. I remember because I was going to Asia a decent amount. I was fighting in one championship, and one of the coaches spoke English and he could speak Thai to the Thai trainers, and they would always have me try to kick with my left leg, and I would tell them like I can't kick, but they weren't getting what I was saying, so I'd always have to go tell. I just remind them, right? Hey, tell this guy I can't kick with my left leg. And so in 2017, had I known how good the surgery was going to be, I would have just done it right then and there. It was awesome. Not even just from an athletic standpoint, but just from my everyday life standpoint. It's great.
That's intriguing. Well, that's been helpful to you. You are one of the people. My philosophy has always been, even though obviously I've done a couple of mixed martial arts matches here and there, doing play-by-play. Obviously, boxing has dominated my career. I believe that mixed martial arts and boxing, there's plenty of room in the big combat sports tent for both sports, and you've espoused that. And so it's not so weird that here you are engaging in some boxing at some point.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think there's enough room for all of it. And I think I really think kind of the infighting between combat sports it's kind of funny to me because we have a lot more in common than we do different. Right. This is whether it's kickboxing, Muay Thai, MMA, boxing, wrestling, submission grappling, jiu-jitsu. Like, there's a lot that's the same and there's a little bit that's different, And so I don't see why people fight so much. I kind of, everything I mentioned there, I'm a fan of. Some things I'm a fan more than other things, but there's none of those things that I say, that's stupid, I don't want to watch that. None of them.
Yeah. Interesting point. Yeah, that is intriguing. Now, you and your brother own wrestling academies, and that's your main focus. And that's how you make your living, and it's a passion for you, obviously. But if you beat Jake Paul convincingly, and some other YouTuber comes after you, could you see yourself boxing again?
Yeah, I saw. Everyone keeps asking me this, and I'm like,
I know.
Listen, I signed up one time to fight Jake Paul because I thought it was going to be fun.
Yeah. Now people are already looking at, hey, that's the nature of boxing, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I think I think probably the most likely thing that would have me fight again would be like if there's a controversial decision, right? We go the distance, and I win, and he says this is bull crap, I got screwed, or he wins, or it's a draw. That would probably be like the most likely scenario where I think I would do it again. Because I'm not really in this YouTube world. I guess like maybe his brother, right? That would be possibly somebody, but like I don't know other YouTubers that box like that. I mean, when Jake Paul called me out, I'm like, okay, like I know his name, but I don't know anything about him whatsoever. That's not my generation.
Yeah. How did you ultimately find out more about him? Did you just Google him?
Well, most of my teenagers, right? So I coach from age 5 to age 18 at my wrestling academies, and those are the ones who told me everything.
That's the way most of us get information, right? From those folks. What exactly do you expect to happen in that fight against Jake Paul on April 17th, from your standpoint?
Yeah, I think he's going to come out hot, and I think he does have some decent boxing skills. I don't think there's no denying that. And I think he's going to think, oh, I'm going to get this guy out of here really quick. His boxing skills are of a fourth grader, as he said. And he's going to realize, okay, he's a little harder hit than I thought. He's a little tougher than I thought. Oh, shit, I'm getting hit back. And then, after a few rounds of that, he's going to start really questioning, do I have the grit to do this? Do I have the toughness to do this? Oh, my gosh, I feel tired. And, I say like all combat sports are the same because anyone who's achieved a really high level of success in any of those fields, they've been at that point in a fight where they have to say, okay, let's freaking get this done, right? I'm tired, so what? I'm hurt, I don't care. And Jake Paul hasn't been there. He's been in 2 fights. He was a relatively unsuccessful wrestler, not very good at all. So he never got there in wrestling, and he's had 2 fights, both of which were guys who had very low skill levels. So he hasn't got there in fighting either. So when he gets there, he's not going to know what to do. He's going to panic. And a great example of a really great fighter who had this happen one time, and the next time he got there, he actually responded a little bit differently, was Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor in his first Nate Diaz fight got to that point at about 7 minutes, and he got tired. And he didn't know what to do, and he gave up. Nate Diaz put him down and choked him out. And if you watch their second fight went all 25 minutes, and there's a point in the second and third rounds when Conor's like getting tired, and he thinks, you see him thinking in his head, fuck this, I'm going to get this done, right? Because he's been there before, and he knows how to deal with it. And every combat athlete, regardless of which one it is, you have to cross that threshold at some point. And most of them don't do that on their first try, right? They fold. And that's what I think is going to happen on April 17th.
Very interesting. And the last question is, you are part of a very unique event. I mean, this event is very unique. You know, it combines generational things. It combines music and boxing. I'm guessing that all of that has made this even a little more fun for you to be involved in.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I said,
you know, it doesn't impact you in the ring.
It would take something really unique for me to come out of retirement, something that I thought was intriguing. And man, this checks all the boxes. I think it's going to be a blast. I think it's going to be a really, really fun event, not only the boxing, but the music also. And yeah, we'll look back at 20 years and be like, that was wild. Like either, you know, it's going to be one of two things. Be either like, oh yeah, I was at the start of that genre of things, right? And it takes off and it becomes a thing where they have these combat sports and music together, or it's gonna be like, oh, remember that thing that we tried to do that one time and then it happened like twice and then it failed. It's gonna be one of those two things, both of which will be cool to look back on in 20 years.
All right. Well, very anxious to see your boxing debut. I'm a big fan of your mixed martial arts performances, and I think a lot of people are very anxious to see you in the ring boxing. So good luck on April 17th.
All right, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
Take care. So that was my chat with Ben Askren. To find out everything about that Triller Fight Club card, you can go to trillerfightclub.com. You can find out how to order it. You can see videos leading up to the fight, features on the different fighters. You can go revisit the initial press conference in which they were all interacting with each other. I hosted that, and you can go take a look at that if you'd like and get yourself ready for that April 17th card. Now, Trip, I believe we have another question that we need to answer.
We do. Nellie sent this question in. Do you think Carl Frampton merits a Hall of Fame induction?
You know, Carl Frampton, of course, who recently just retired after his loss to Jamel Herring. I did both of Carl Frampton's fights against Leo Santa Cruz. He won the first one, lost the second. And I also did one of his championship fights that he had over in Ireland. And it was a wonderful, terrific event and very exciting. You know, I love Carl Frampton. I think he's a great guy. I think he's a superb fighter. But I wouldn't vote for him to be in the Hall of Fame. I think his career has been a good one, but it doesn't have enough victories against top-name fighters, in my opinion, to merit the Hall of Fame. He won the title twice. He defended it, I believe, 3 or 4 times the first time. But I just don't think they're Hall of Fame credentials. And I am of the belief that the standards for the Hall of Fame have been lowered in the last 7 or 8 or 9 years. I'm not going to get into specifics about who should or shouldn't be in, but I just think people have gotten into the Hall of Fame that I think it's become more of a popularity contest. And I don't think the people selecting are looking at the criteria as carefully as they might. So I love Carl Frampton. Please don't be mad at me. If you are his fan, I'm in no way denigrating his career. I think he's terrific. I just don't think Hall of Fame is where induction is something that's totally appropriate. Well, 2 men that are in Boxing Hall of Fame that put on a major event back in 1987 on April 6th. The Super Fight, as it's called, by Brian Dugan, who has a book of that name out now, were Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard. And Brian's book is an excellent read. And I wanted to have him on to discuss it and kind of revisit those great memories from Hagler Leonard. So here's our chat with author Brian Dugan. So Brian, as you wrote this book about Hagler Leonard and their epic encounter, you of course set the stage for it, and you went back to set the stage with each man. And there were a number of key topics that you did to set the table in a very excellent manner. And one of them was recounting some of the ways in which they got to the super fight. And one was the Marvin Hagler, Tommy Hearns fight, which I am intimately familiar with since I called that fight and was there for it. And you spent a good portion of the time on that, talking about that amazing press tour that created such animosity between the fighters.
Yes, I mean, I think that Marvin and the creation of animosity probably fitted hand in glove, whatever the circumstance, Al. And I think, though, that as you say, that Hagler Hearns fight, with which you are very familiar, of course. I mean, that was one of the wars of the ages, and it's very interesting in terms of how Marvin was able to tap into that internal rage and absolutely bring it out where it consumed the ring on Tommy in the end. And of course, Ray was there at ringside, like yourself, commentating on the fight. And there's two memorable things, I think, from that fight for me in particular. The way in which Marvin Hagler ran across the ring to deliver those final two blows, it will be forever seared into my mind. And also Ray Leonard's statement at the end of the fight, where he said, "That's the reason I'm retired," and you couldn't blame him at that point. To be fair, I think
you had something interesting in the book that Ray Leonard said that he thought the man that veered away from his game plan the quickest was likely the one that would lose, and he said that was going to be Tommy Hearns.
Absolutely, and that was, as you would recognize with Ray, that was very intuitive on his part, and showed his intellect and his ring intelligence and how he could weigh up a fight really well. And he knew that if Marvin Hagler remained the immovable object, then Tommy Hearns would be the man who would blink, if you like, in the gunfight as it was. I think at the end of it, it was so stunning. I think people at ringside were just awed and shocked by what they had seen. One observer, one stunned observer, turned to the man beside him at ringside and said, "Who should he fight next?" And the reaction was, "Well, how about Russia?" And that was just how incredible Marvin Hagler had been in that fight.
Yeah, it was an amazing performance, and created what could have been the best first round or best round in middleweight boxing history. Now, in the book, you talk a lot about the different relationships of these men and and who they their camps. And for Ray Leonard, you detail his relationship with Mike Trainer, who, of course, to boxing fans is a well-known figure. To the casual fan, they may not know him. He was a lawyer who represented Ray Leonard. And they had a long relationship, and it was an important one, wasn't it?
I think it could be said that it might have been the most important and vital relationship in Ray Leonard's life. Certainly his business life, that's for sure. Mike Trainer transformed what Ray Leonard might have been. He made Ray Leonard front and center long before Money Mayweather came along on the scene. There was Money Leonard. Ray was the first $100 million fighter. The super fight would be the first $100 million fight. And largely that was down, as you quite rightly point out, to one man. And that single man that was behind Ray Leonard all the way was Mike Trainer. And interestingly, he was a guy who came from outside of boxing. And he brought a fresh perspective. He made the fighter the main man, as opposed to, as we all know, it's run by the promoters, it's It's run by managers. It's run with a lot of chicanery, where the likes of Don King would be involved. But you know, Mike
Don
Trent.
King and chicanery, shocking.
Well, one of the great stories, which I love, is when, and no doubt you read this, when Don and Bob Arum are trying to make the fight between Ray and Roberto, and Don comes along. And of course, they don't talk to one another. They're talking through Mike Trainer. And eventually Mike Trainer just gets up and says, if you guys don't talk, you know, I'm going down to Panama on my own. I'll make the fight myself. And and that was the kind of guy that he was. He made things happen, but he made things happen for his client, to his client's preferences, and not to the promoter's preferences all the way.
Yeah, that was interesting, to be sure. And you spent a lot of the book talking about another long time relationship, business one, and that is the one between Marvin Hagler and Goody and Pat Petronelli. And, you know, I lived that period with Marvin Hagler and the Petronellis, and I was a firsthand witness to the strength of their relationship, the affection they had for each other, and that relationship was as strong a one as you could ever imagine in boxing or anything else.
They called it the triangle, Al, and they called it that for a reason. It was unbreakable in that sense, and loyalty was a big thing for Marvin. He stayed with the Petronellis throughout his career, when men like Don King were trying to muscle their way in, when other promoters would have done the same. I think it went all the way back to when Marvin used to fashion himself as the best construction worker in Massachusetts. When he was working for the Petronellis and their construction company. And they did things for Marvin that they didn't have to do at that point. They were small things, such as buying him lunch and making sure that he didn't pay it at the end of the week out of his meager wages. But that meant a lot to Hagler when it came to the big bucks, when he would fight for world titles and everything. And he just felt, I think, that they were men he could trust. And he came from a background, Al, as you will know, you knew Marvin much better than I. Marvin had a lot of reason to mistrust a lot of people. And he felt in Goody and Pat, they were people he could trust to the grave.
And tell a story that you detailed in the book about how when the Hagler-Leonard fight was getting close to being made, and I think it was Pat, I think, that was trying to talk Hagler into it. He and Bob Arum went there. Explain what happened how they interacted just before that fight was being made, and it kind of reveals the strength of their relationship.
It really does, because they couldn't get hold of Marvin. Marvin was in his mountain hideaway, and they really couldn't pin him down as to agreeing ultimately the terms on the fight. And so they drove up into the mountains, Pat and Bob Arum. And Pat said to Bob, listen, I'll go in, I'll speak to him, you stay here. It won't take long, and I'll be straight out. So they actually sat outside, Pat and Marvin, and Bob Arum was able to watch proceedings. And at a certain point, Bob was able to see Marvin get up out of his chair and start thumping the table really hard. And he was clearly quite angry. And not long after, Pat got up, walked away, came over to the car. And of course, Bob was thinking, well, the fight must be blown, or what happened? And so he asks him, and Pat says, you know what? I said to Marvin that if you want myself and Goody to give up our 33%, we'll do it for 10%, Marvin, for you to take this fight and make it happen, because we believe in you all the way. And that's when Marvin got up and said, Pat, you're not taking a penny less than your 33%, or I'm not going to go through with the fight. And that shows you that the loyalty was two ways. The Petronellis were all the way with Marvin, but Marvin was all the way with them, even to the point of the fight was going to be off if they didn't take their 33%.
Wow. Remarkable story. You detail in the book also, and we're going to get to the fight. Well, you detail in the book that Hagler and Leonard circled each other a lot in their careers way before this fight was actually made, before the super fight was finally made. And there were a lot of potential times when it looked like it might be made, wasn't there?
Yes, I mean, you'll remember it better than I. But when I went back to research, it was incredible. For 6 years, really, they were intertwined like that. They were connected, and the fight was being talked about in a very real way. We all know how boxing works. It percolates for a long time. Sometimes it fizzles out altogether. Finally, the big fights get made. But there were reasons, of course, why there was that long interlude. For a start, I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that there is a quite significant gap between welterweight and middleweight.
Right.
You're talking 147 pounds to 160 pounds. And you're not talking about a 160-pound guy who was, a softish kind of boxer type. He was an absolute enforcer at middleweight. And I think that was a gap that Ray recognized was a bit too significant at certain points in his own career when he was still at welterweight. And of course, he had the detached retina injury and the operation, and that meant that actually he retired, although he did that in a way which further fueled Marvin's resentment, because Ray, in his grandiose way and his quite manipulative, perhaps Machiavellian ways, decided to invite Marvin to Baltimore, to the Civic Center, to this grand occasion where Howard Cosell was presenting. And in fact, it went out live on ABC, I believe, at the time.
Yes.
And of course, Marvin was at ringside, specially invited by Ray. And he thought that he was there to accept Ray Leonard's challenge, that Ray was finally going to challenge for the world middleweight title. And of course, Ray retired. And Marvin bore that grudge like he bore all the others. But that was an added resentment. He felt like a stooge in Ray Leonard's play. And that was not something that you visited on Marvin Hagler easily and got away with it. So, of course, when the time comes, when Ray comes out of retirement the first time to fight Kevin Howard, very unimpressive. For the first time in his career, he got knocked down. Marvin was at ringside. And of course, he enjoyed the fact that Ray got knocked down and didn't look good, but he also recognized that meant that their super fight wasn't going to happen. And of course, it didn't. Ray retired. But of course, it just burnt away at Ray Leonard, that itch, that feeling, which he genuinely felt that he could beat Marvin Hagler. Even when Marvin was at the top of the tree, when he was getting all the plaudits for destroying Tommy Hearns, for destroying John the Beast Mugabe, Ray felt he could actually tame the monster. And of course, when Ray decides to throw down the gauntlet and say he's coming out of retirement to have one fight, he'll face Marvin Hagler. Marvin then actually starts playing games himself and says, well, maybe I'm retired, on the Johnny Carson show famously, he elongated his kind of, he was drawing out his decision. And of course, he would go through with it because he felt that he had taken on all challenges and he wasn't going to give up on the last man standing, Ray Leonard most of all.
Yeah, and when they did sit down and negotiate this fight, this has always been one of the most fascinating things to me, and you detail it in your book. It was intriguing because both men won in a way from the negotiations. Hagler won the financial part, and Leonard won the competition part. Explain that.
Very much so, and that's why throughout the book, I detailed, for the most part, the purses each man would get, because it was very significant, because that was one of the biggest resentments that Marvin had. That when he turned professional, his first fight he made $40. Ray Leonard made $50,000.
Yeah, it's a little different.
And even when they both challenged for the world title for the first time, when Ray fought Wilfred Benitez and beat him for the welterweight title, and Marvin challenged Antifermo for the world middleweight title, and Actually, it was a larcenous draw.
Yeah.
You know, again, there was a major discrepancy in the purses. Marvin got paid $40,000. Ray $1 million. And this is where Ray Leonard, whatever you say about Ray Leonard, I think he's the smartest fighter who's ever probably set foot in a boxing ring.
Yeah.
Because he knew this time he was willing to give up on the money, because he was willing to give Marvin the lion's share of the purse for the bigger things that would be more crucial in terms of who might win the fight, such as the gloves, such as the size of the ring, but most crucially, the number of rounds. That was the biggest thing that he wanted to be in his favor. And it was the biggest factor, Mike Trainer said, in terms of the negotiations. It was the most challenging aspect of doing the deal. And of course, Pat Petronelli would rue the fact that they allowed it so easily to settle for 12 rounds, because had Hagler put down his foot and said 15 rounds, Ray Leonard was in no position as the challenger to dictate the number of rounds the fight would be. But Marvin gave that up, and it was a very significant happening.
Yeah, and they fought with 10-ounce gloves instead of 8-ounce gloves. And the ring size was allowed to be, as you said, the biggest that you could get it, 20 feet by 20 feet. And a lot of that was fueled by the fact that Hagler felt that there's no way he could possibly lose this fight.
There was almost an arrogance about it all. You know, it's interesting when you go back over it, and I remember, as do you, in terms of the build-up, everyone thought that Ray Leonard was out of his mind. What you're taking on the monster. You're taking on a guy who is an ogre, who goes in and destroys fighters' careers. I think Marvin had said at the time when Ray had come back to fight Kevin Howard, that if Ray is stupid enough to get into the ring with me, then I'm stupid enough to rip his eye out. You know, he was just that base about it, you know, and that was, you know, people feared not only for Ray's eyesight going into the fight, they feared actually for his life going into that fight. You know, there was a feeling that he was coming back. It was almost like, shall we say, Bjorn Borg coming back with his little wooden racket to face Rafa Nadal. You know, in terms of you just were sending a guy in there who, yes, was once great, but couldn't be great in this particular circumstance. And that's what the general feeling was.
And one of the most interesting things that happened before this fight was that the Hagler camp turned down, as you detail in the book, turned down Harry Gibbs, the British judge, right? Partially because they were so angry with all things British because of what had happened when he beat Alan Minter for the title, and a number of, frankly, racist fans had showered the ring, and it took away an important moment from him. And so they were very suspicious of all things that were British. So they vetoed him, but the judge that they ended up with didn't serve them very well, did he?
One of the great ironies, and again, cause for regret with the Petronellis and with Marvin ultimately. But that's actually one of the things that I went back and investigated, and actually it's one of the great myths. It's not actually that he was British, and you're right, absolutely. What Marvin had experienced in terms of the terrible racism to which he was subjected when he won the world middleweight title from Alan Minter. And he never forgot that, because it denied him his great moment, his great crowning glory. Right. He didn't receive the belt in the ring. But it wasn't that Harry Gibbs was English and British and it was going back to that particular moment, because don't forget, Harry Gibbs actually had been a judge, although a pretty redundant judge, for the Hagler-Hearns fight. But it was actually that they felt that the British judge might favor the boxer over the fighter, if you like. Okay. And so that's why they brought in Jojo Gira. And then, of course, the myth is that Harry Gibbs scored the fight for Marvin.
Yeah, you explain that in the book. That's very good. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, everyone, the story is, depending on who's telling it, that Harry Gibbs scored the fight by 7 rounds to 5 or 8 rounds to 4 in favor of Marvin Hagler, which compounds the irony, if you like. But actually, Harry Gibbs said at the time that he didn't score the fight off the TV. He's a professional boxing judge. He feels he should be at the ringside if he's ever going to have to put his name on and reputation on the line in terms of how he would score a fight. So he didn't score the fight.
Yeah, it's fascinating. The fight itself will remain forever a subject of debate. The fight between Marvin Hagler and Ray Leonard that you detail so well in your book, Super Fight. And it is one that everybody has an opinion on. It's divided in the boxing world. And part of it is because there were so many dramas played out within that fight. The first one was that Marvin Hagler decided to fight the first 3 rounds as a right-hander and box in this fight. And you talk about it in the book. It was an interesting decision on his part.
It was a very interesting decision and the wrong decision. Gil Clancy, who was calling the fight, immediately called that out and said he couldn't understand why on earth Marvin Hagler was turning righty, because he was more effective as a southpaw.
Yeah.
And of course, when the longer the fight went on, of course, that was borne out as well. I think this is where it comes back to Ray's intelligence. Ray had done the ultimate psych job. I mean, he had psyched Marvin going back to their dinner in Bethesda, Maryland, where he got Marvin to acknowledge that, he felt like he was ready to retire, that he was getting injured more easily, he was getting cut more easily. And he actually was pretty much finished with boxing. And this was ahead of him going into the fight with Mugabe. And during the press tour, and you mentioned the Hagler-Hearns press tour, during the Leonard-Hagler press tour, Ray got to Marvin to the extent that halfway through the tour, Marvin bowed out because Ray was just complimenting him all the way. Mm-hmm. And he even sowed the seeds of, you guys, as in you guys in the media, you don't give Marvin Hagler enough credit as a boxer. You're all saying that he's this destroyer, which he is, but he's a magnificent boxer as well. And you guys don't give him enough credit. And he sowed the seed in Marvin, where Marvin was in 2 minds, actually. Do you know what? Maybe it would be a better thing for me to try to outbox Ray Leonard. Maybe I'd get more kudos out of that. And it left him conflicted. And of course, he made the wrong choice.
And then as the fight wore on, Hagler turned lefty and started to be more effective in the fight. And in the middle rounds and some of the later rounds, did very well. And a seminal moment in that fight came in round 9, didn't it? When Marvin Hagler appeared. There were several times in the fight where he stunned Leonard, but that was the round in which it appeared Marvin Hagler might literally end things.
It looked like he had finally walked him down, as they say in fight parlance. You know, he had landed some meaty blows, as you say, earlier in the fight. I think the 5th round was the round in which Ray acknowledged that he had been hit the hardest by a right uppercut, and that really did hurt him, but he disguised it very well in that round. But in the 9th round, you're absolutely right. There was no disguising. Ray Leonard looked in serious trouble, to the point where ringside observers thought this is now the end. Marvin had caught up with him. He had backed him into Ray's own corner. He was firing in a fusillade of blows, and of course Marvin, when he was at his most fierce, and he got a man like that on the ropes, Marvin was relentless and ruthless in finishing fighters off. But there was something in Ray Leonard, in terms of Sugar Ray. You get the feeling, that the sweetness and all of this and the lightness. The sweetness never went all the way down with Ray, is the truth. When he was in the ring, he was a mean man. And in that moment, he summoned up all of the energies in him and was able to fight his way out of the corner. And it was magnificent. He did it 3 times with magnificent salvos of blows. But of course, as you say, that's one of the great controversies in terms of people debate it to this day in terms of who won, as you say, because the meteor blows in the fight were landed by Marvin, and people will say that Ray was just shoe shining. But I think that if you were just shoe shining against Marvin Hagler, I don't think that Marvin Hagler would allow you to go 12 rounds. I think Ray was also hitting him back with some pretty serious blows himself. But that ninth round was an incredible round, and not quite on Hagler-Hearns level, but probably the Second World War wasn't on Hagler-Hearns level.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it was a great round.
And the fight goes to full 12, not 15 as Marvin probably would have liked. But the decision, famous now, a split decision with two judges having it 115, 113, one for Hagler, one for Leonard. And then Jojo Guerra, that we previously mentioned, the judge from Mexico, has it 118, 111 for Ray Leonard. And that was the ultimate insult and created, to this day, disdain among fans and also great consternation among Marvin Hagler when he was alive and the Petronellis as well.
Very much so. In fact, Pat said that the bitterness Marvin would take to his grave, that it was more bitter to Marvin than death itself. And it was an outrageous decision. Anyone who would try, and I've heard, decent judges or people we would consider decent judges attempt to try to suggest that, well, you can see how he scored at 100. You cannot see how he scored that fight.
No.
18
Marvin Hagler was the victim of some really awful scorecards in his career. The Vito Antuofermo fight, in which he challenged for the title, one of the worst scored fights in history. And then that specific card, certainly you could make a case for Ray Leonard winning the fight, but 118 to 111 was absurd.
It was absurd, totally absurd. And I think the bitterness from that decision was what persuaded Marvin to walk away in the end. He really felt that he had been a champion of, quite rare commitment. He had been a champion of very rare honor. He was the ultimate fighter's fighter. He was the ultimate, blue collar champion, if you like. He appealed to every man. And he just felt that this was just one more occasion, and it'll be one last occasion when boxing did the dirty on him, needlessly. As you say, if someone was to give the decision to Ray marginally, and right, he lost that way, that's okay. You can accept that. But to give it by 8 points, 10 rounds to 2, it wasn't a 10 round to 2 fight for Ray Leonard, and even Ray would acknowledge that.
Yeah, that's for sure. So both men lived on past that. Sadly, we just lost Marvin Hagler. Devastating to all of us that knew him and all the fans that loved him. They had to carry on after that fight. Marvin did it by going, as you detail in the book, to Italy with his new wife, Kay. And ironically, you talk in the book about their marital issues during the course of their life and how they spilled over into the public. And ironically, both men got divorced from their previous wives the same year in 1990 when Marvin divorced Bertha and Ray divorced Juanita. And Marvin Hagler was able to find a certain peace in Italy, wasn't he, with his life and with the way he went about living the rest of it?
Well, it's an incredible thing to think that the man who sprang from the deepest of ghettos in Central Ward, New York, finally found a home, and as you say, peace in Milan, Italy. He
of all places.
Yes, I mean, he lived quite a cultured, sophisticated life in the end, and he loved it. He really enjoyed it. He loved the Italian people. He loved that way of life, and he was incredibly close to Kay, which of course makes it so sad in terms of what has just happened, and the suddenness of that, I think, increased the sense of shock that we all felt. But he did find that peace in Italy. He tried to find a second career in acting. I think Marvin himself would have been the first to acknowledge that he was never going to be an Oscar winner. But you know what? He tried. And I think
he enjoyed it.
He absolutely loved it. He loved it. And he loved it. He actually had that acting bug in him before he had left the boxing game. And he wanted to pursue it. And he pursued it in a very real way, as you would expect of Marvin Hagler. But, you know, he certainly found peace in Italy. I think he found peace as well, Al, because he was able to turn his back on boxing. He didn't fall into this trap of trying to come back, which of course Ray did in the end. Ray came back several times after that fight and got beaten up badly in the end by Hector Camacho. He got beaten up by Terry Norris previous to that as well. Marvin, that never happened to him. And of course, he treated with disdain Ray's efforts to actually recruit Marvin into that seniors tour of Tommy and Roberto. And there's, you know, there's something really classy about Marvin Hagler in the end, that he turned his back on that. And, you know, even now, in terms of his final decision that there would be no funeral, he didn't like funerals. It was painful to him when he had to bury Pat and Goody. Very painful. He didn't want to be in the church, but of course he was in the church. And you know, there's one thing about Marvin Hagler, and you were there this night, and I think it speaks everything about Marvin, because he was this destroyer in the ring. There's absolutely no question about that. There was no mercy in him when he went to war. He went to war to finish you, to put you down and obliterate you. But he had a relationship with his mother, Ida May, which was so tight. I remember, I recall after the fight in London against Alan Minter, she reflected on where they had come from in terms of Central Ward, and she said that they don't talk a lot about it because some memories are too painful. But you were there in Las Vegas on the night that Marvin was inducted into the Nevada Hall of Fame. And the way he interrupted his speech in one of his, you know, most glorious moments, because he had been denied the glory when he challenged for the title against Allen, and he felt like he was getting the acclaim that had been denied him for so long, and he interrupted it, and he turned to his mother in the audience, and he said, "Could you stand up? Could you please stand up, Ma?" And he called her Ma. And I think there's something so endearing and so very different to what that ogreish image is of that monster in the ring. You know, he was also his mother's son, and there was a great attachment there, and that's what Marvin was as well.
That was a very special moment. I remember vividly. I hosted that evening, and I remember it very vividly, and I remember the emotion that Marvin Hagler had on that night. Ray Leonard, of course, has always remained a major celebrity in our pop culture, and has participated in so many different things over the years, and has also kind of surprised people with his candid interviews and book and all the rest about some of the demons that he's gotten past.
Candor is precisely the word. He's been incredibly open. His memoir is searingly honest. He holds his hands up to domestic abuse. He didn't treat Juanita as he ought to have, but also he holds his hands up to he acknowledged for the first time the sexual abuse to which he had been subjected when he was young. And that openness is actually incredible, because you always had, you know, and I think this is the thing that kind of increased Marvin's contemptuous attitude towards Ray. He used to spit out in his description of Ray, "pretty boy." He didn't mean it as a compliment. And Ray had this, you know, almost veneer. He was the all-American hero. It was too good to be true. He had his sweetheart Juanita, their little boy. Both of their photographs were sewn to his socks when he won the Olympic medal. But actually, it was a fairy tale. Ray's background was actually quite hard himself, not quite to the level of Central Ward, but obviously those incidences of sexual abuse, you know, as they would do, hurt him immeasurably and hit him at his core. And he struggled to deal with that all his life. And it perhaps contributed to his cocaine abuse, which again, he acknowledged candidly in his memoirs, and also his alcoholism, which he says he's still living with. In fact, the current pandemic, he found it pretty tough at the beginning because he didn't have his regular AA meetings at that particular point. But of course, as we have all done, we've adapted to life on Zoom, and he was able to resume those meetings over Zoom, and that's helped him. But you know, he had his own demons, and he's had to deal with them. And I guess the victory is that they both came out of their particular circumstances, and that's maybe the ultimate victory in terms of Marvin found his peace, and Ray's got a certain peace. I think that he was shocked when he heard that Marvin had passed away so suddenly, and it's very poignant, particularly as we're around the time of the anniversary of the super fight. But you know, Ray, he lives in Pacific Palisades. He's lived there quite a long time. Neighbors with Steven Spielberg. He's got a loving family, second wife Bernadette, and I think life has been pretty good to Ray in the end.
And those two men inexorably bound by the super fight that you detail in your book very well, and they will be intertwined forever historically, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's a certain kind of leap, if you like, or pushing the boundaries. I suggested that you know, for someone like myself and others who might be just slightly too young to remember Ali Fraser, that it was kind of our Ali Fraser, Hagler Leonard. You know, of course, there were the other great fights of that era, the Four Kings, as they're referred to, with Tommy and Roberto. But I think central to it all, the jewel in the crown had to be Hagler Leonard, because they both had beaten Roberto and Tommy. They had to fight one another. And I suppose in terms of the way that people are polarized in terms of the fight, you're either in the Hagler camp or you're in the Leonard camp. You know, the comparison to Ali Fraser, I would suggest, maybe stands in a certain respect. And you're right, that they're inexorably linked. They'll forever be linked, and it'll always be known as the super fight. And I think if fight fans are in a bar and the subject of Hagler Leonard comes up, you can be sure that there will be one big argument.
That's for sure, yeah. And you did a great job of detailing not just the fight, but and what went into that, but also what led up to it with these two men. It's called The Super Fight. Brian, you did a great job with the book, and I'm happy that we had a chance to chat about it.
Al, I really appreciate it, and I just want to say this: it's very, very special to be on your show. I grew up in Northern Ireland. I grew up in a time known by the euphemism, the Troubles. It was a war. There was a war going on, and you know, a lot of violence. And I was drawn to the violence of the ring. I was fascinated by it, and a series which you know, you'll inexorably be linked with, certainly in my mind and minds of a lot of fight fans. Super Bouts.
Yeah.
You know, you conveyed a lot of big fights, including this one. When we got to looking back on it, and of course Marvin and Tommy. So look, I really appreciate being on the show. You brought some magical boxing bouts into my home in Northern Ireland, and I'm really delighted that we were able to talk about this particular one.
I appreciate that. The Super Bout show was kind of introduced me to the European audience, and it was I hear so many people talk about it, and it was a fun series because we got to show great fights, and I have been privileged to visit Belfast on a number of occasions, and I have really enjoyed talking to people there to try and get a feel for those troubled times that I can't say enjoyed. It's been insightful to me to talk to them and kind of relive those times you're talking about, which I know were very difficult for everyone there. And boxing has played a big role. Bear McGuigan was the perfect example with his story of marriage to a Catholic girl, and the intermarriage that he had, and all the other things that go with that. So boxing plays a big role in that. And you are a fine author who have done a number of books, including your great book on Joe Calzaghe, and this one, which is coming out on the super fight, will be one to add to your collection. Thanks very much, Brian.
Thanks, Al. All the best.
All righty. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Brian Dugan. I was fascinated. I was so fascinated that it was the longest interview I think we've done in this whole series of Al Bernstein Unplugged. I just enjoy. He's a good storyteller, both in print and I think verbally as well. And I was having a good time talking to him about it. Now there is a tinge of melancholy in talking about that topic now, because Marvin Hagler has passed recently, and so just talking about it kind of makes you a little bit sad. And I have to admit, Trip, when I was going through it with Brian, I had a kind of a melancholy feeling.
And you've talked about it in the past, how you and Hagler became much closer than maybe you initially thought, and how great he was to your family. On the weekend, you were inducted into the Hall of Fame. And it's funny how you can cover an athlete and then get to know him over a lot of years.
Yeah, and it's very good, very well put. And I am somebody who takes seriously the idea that, I want to be friendly with everyone in the sport of boxing, but you can't afford to be friends with everyone. You have to, I think, retain just a little bit of space, because you're going to be commenting on them and all the rest. Though there were exceptions, and Marvin Hagler became the exception to the rule. And I have to say, I think of him as a friend. And, I mentioned George Foreman earlier. I have the same feeling for George. And Marvin Hagler was somebody identified with in the sport of boxing very much. And of course, he'll be profoundly missed. And they are having a special memorial for him on May 23rd in Brockton, Massachusetts. I am going to do my level-headed best to get to that event. They've asked me to speak. We may have a Showtime fight on May 22nd, so I'm hoping that fight will be in the East Coast, so I can hustle over and be a part of that memorial event for Marvin Hagler, and we'll have more information on that as it plays out. But miss Marvin for sure. Now, one of the ways there are many ways you can see our show. One of the ways is on Tom Yankello's World Class channel, on World Class Boxing channel on YouTube, where he runs our shows, and we talk about Tom's channel, which is an excellent one with great videos, both informational and historical, on the sport of boxing. So go check out Tom's channel at World Class Boxing. Our next time out, we're going to have Brandon Lee as our guest, who is a young welterweight who is lighting up the boxing world. He's had a number of appearances on Showtime in Showbox, where he has electrified fans. His last fight out, a third-round knockout over Samuel Tia, who had never been stopped, was a highlight reel knockout. And we're also going to have Gordon Hall, the executive producer of Showbox, on with us, a Showtime executive. And the reason I'm having Gordon on is because Showbox has been the birthplace of champions in the past, and Brandon Lee looks like one of those. And I want to have him talk a little bit about how a fighter kind of matriculates on Showbox in that way. And he'll inform us about that. So it should be a fun outing the next time. Trip, thank you very much for your efforts as always.
Enjoyed it, and look forward to next week.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks to the Let's Do Something production folks for making this show possible, and we'll see you next time.